So let's say you get charged with a crime and you end up getting on probation. Now you're on probation for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and boom, you get slammed with a probation violation and you have no idea what to do. Most people start freaking out. They're really concerned. They're worried because you're scared that you're going to go to jail. And rightfully so, that's usually what happens if you violate probation. But if you want to get ahead of the game, let me tell you what you need to do in the event that you're ever in a situation where you're facing a probation violation. So I'm going to explain what happens if you ever violate probation. Now, the first thing that you need to know is what even triggers a probation violation. And that's usually one of two things. One is you get charged with a new crime. So in case you didn't know, you can't get charged with new crimes while you are on probation. So if you get charged with a new crime, if you plead guilty to a new crime as well, that would be a probation violation. And I've usually found that it's still considered a probation violation if you pick up a new charge and the charge gets dismissed. Judges still want to see you in court for that, so just be careful about that as well. So that's the first way that you can violate probation. Now, the second way, and the most common way that people violate probation, is that they're not completing the terms of their probation. They're not adhering to what the judge has ordered them to do during probation. So let me explain the probation violation process and what typically really triggers it. So what triggers a probation violation is a probation officer files some type of report with the court, or the probation officer notifies the court in some way, shape, or form that you are not complying with probation or you're in violation of the terms of your probation. Now, based upon that report, typically what the judge may do is issue a probation violation hearing. So normally the judge is not going to just revoke your probation. Typically the judge will want to hear from you, and the judge will have the hearing for you to explain yourself and for you to explain to the court why they should not violate your probation. Basically, the judge would want to hear, well, have you been complying or not? And so that is what typically triggers a probation violation hearing. Now, when you go in front of the judge will typically hear from the prosecutor side, the judge will hear from the probation side, and typically the judge will want to hear from you and your defense attorney. Here's the thing, most of the time, judges don't want to just violate you. You gotta really give them a good reason. I mean, you usually have to be begging to just go to jail. If you are a person that can admit, hey, I did this one thing wrong, but here's how I remedied it, then that's a good way to show the judge that at least you're trying. Don't give excuses to the judge if you make a mistake. So for instance, let's say you are supposed to drug test regularly and you test positive for a controlled substance that you're not supposed to have in your system. Now, don't go to court and start saying, hey, judge, I didn't know that I ingested cocaine, right? The judge is going to look at you crazy, like, why are you standing here lying to me? You said that you smoked a cigarette, but you didn't know that there was cocaine in the cigarette. By the way, these are actual real excuses that people have told judges before. So I'm not making this up, but you can't go into court lying to the judge, and especially with the worst excuses of all that are not even believable. But what would usually work is you test positive. Don't just wait until the probation violation hearing. Go and get into a treatment program. Start an inpatient or an outpatient treatment program. And by the time you have your probation violation hearing, at least you can provide the judge with a letter or a certificate that shows you've tried to remedy a mistake that you've made. For the most part, if you're able to show up in a probation violation hearing with some proof that you've attempted to resolve or address the issue at hand, the judge will probably give you another chance and maybe set a new date for a continued probation violation hearing to check your progress. If you have a probation violation hearing, the best thing that you can do is be prepared. And that's usually done by addressing the issues that are outlined in the probation violation report as soon as possible. So let me go over some common violations that I often see in probation violation cases. The number one violation that I see is a person violate a condition for drug treatment. Sometimes a probation order may say that you have to go into inpatient treatment, and that means that you may have to take time off of work, out of your day for several days, potentially 30 days or even longer, to go into an inpatient program. Most inpatient programs that I've seen, especially the serious ones, require a minimum of 30 days. And that may or may not even include time to detox as well from any substances that are in your system. I see a lot of people violate that drug treatment provision and probation orders because they don't want to go into inpatient. They'd rather go into outpatient because they don't think that inpatient is needed. What I can say is whatever the court's order is the court's order. You'll probably want to just get it done and out the way and then follow up with outpatient treatment instead. So drug treatment, I do see a lot of judges take that seriously, and to the extent that you are violating that provision, that's not something that many judges are going to allow very much wiggle room for. Another violation that I see is like failure to meet with your probation officer or check in with your probation officer. So if you end up becoming a loss of contact, your probation officer may not be able to find you, or maybe you lose your phone or otherwise. It's really important that you maintain contact and communication with your probation officer however you can, whether you can borrow a person's phone to check in or get assistance with getting a ride to meet with your probation officer. But whatever you can do, make sure that you touch base with your probation officer as often as you are required to, and to the extent that there's some issue or emergency that comes up, don't just not show. Communicate that issue to your probation officer and then ask for a follow-up date to see your probation officer because of whatever issue that occurred. Let's say you have a child that is supposed to be in school, your child is sick, and now you had to pick up your child from school. If that coincides with the meeting with your probation officer, then you have an emergency. You're not gonna leave your sick child in school, right? Especially if they need to go to the doctor. So emergencies happen, that's fine, but it's really important to communicate those issues with your probation officer to remain in compliance. And so here's the thing. If the judge determines that you're in violation of your probation, there are a couple of things that they can do. They can give you another chance. So maybe they'll set another court hearing to address if you're now back into compliance with your probation terms, or they can sentence you to a period of jail time that you were supposed to serve instead of you completing the rest of your probation. So the point of probation is to give you an opportunity to be supervised in the community, to show a judge that you don't have to serve all this jail time, that you can be a law-abiding citizen, be a productive member of society without having to spend all this time in jail. However, if you show a judge that you can't follow a court's order to successfully complete probation, then they're just going to revoke your probation and put you in jail, which is what most people don't want to do. If the judge gives you another opportunity to come back to court and show that you can come back into compliance, what may happen is that they may give you some stricter probation requirements. So for instance, some of the things that a judge can do is require you to report more often. So let's say you were supposed to report via telephone to your probation officer. They may have you now start going in person instead of over the phone communications with your probation officer. It forces you to do a little bit more work. Another example of something a judge might do if you're in violation of your probation is order drug treatment. So perhaps you're in a situation where you're not required to do drug treatment. Maybe you're supposed to just drug test. But if you start consistently testing positive for drugs and alcohol, then at this point, a judge may just order you to go into drug treatment. And that's usually going to be an inpatient program. It's very rare that if you're actively testing positive for a controlled substance that you're not prescribed, that they would just allow you to go into outpatient treatment. So something that a judge may force you to do is now go into inpatient drug treatment. Another thing that I've seen judges do in probation violations is order that you be placed on a GPS monitor. So you may be forced to now have a GPS tracker on your ankle 24/7. You may even have home confinement. And so maybe you are required to stay home all day. You can't go anywhere, maybe except for work or otherwise. But you may have some stricter requirements on your movement because of something that you may have done to violate probation. And I also mentioned home confinement. It's also the same as house arrest. House arrest could be another probation violation. It could be permanent for the entire duration of your probation, or it could be almost like I'll put you on house arrest for 30 days to see how you do. If you are still, not adhering to the terms of your probation, then the judge can say, okay, well, at this point, I'm going to put you in jail since you can't even abide by the terms of house arrest or home confinement. So that's another probation violation. Another thing that a judge can do is impose a curfew. So they may say, hey, look, we'll give you the opportunity to go about your day, but you have to be home by 6 or you have to be home by 7 p.m. Usually they're going to impose a curfew so you're not out in these streets doing things that you're not supposed to be doing. So if they impose a curfew, it's usually going to prohibit you from doing things late at night or very early in the morning. And so oftentimes a curfew you can be out by 6 a.m., but you have to be home by 6 p.m. The latest I typically see is maybe you have to be home by 10 p.m. outside of any, employment opportunity that you have. But you're certainly not going to be out and about in the bars late at night when they're open. So a curfew is another probation violation. Finally, another thing that a judge can do if you are in violation of your probation is to just simply extend your probation. And this is a judge giving you additional time to comply with the terms of your probation, as opposed to saying, hey, look, we're at the end of your probation, you're in violation, so I'm just gonna throw you in jail. Some judges may not want to do that. They may want to just extend your probation for a longer period of time to allow you to come back into compliance. And if you are able to successfully complete that additional time on probation, then they will successfully terminate your probation. Those are just some of the things that a judge can do if you are in violation of probation to give you another chance. The worst thing that a judge can do is simply just revoke your probation and then go ahead and sentence you to the period of jail time that you were supposed to serve in the first place. That is what you don't want the judge to do. And so it's really important that if there are any issues with probation, you get in touch with your attorney immediately to get those issues under control so that you are on a good page with your probation officer. And I'm going to give you a pro tip that I typically give my clients. And if you have a pen and paper, you want to write this down. But it's really important that you communicate with your probation officer in writing. I don't know how many probation violation hearings I've been to where a probation officer says, hey, look, this person didn't call me, or they didn't check in with me, or otherwise, or they just didn't show up. Oftentimes people have excuses. Maybe they went to the doctor, or there was other emergencies that occurred. And so I typically have my clients communicate with their probation officer in writing via email. That way, a probation officer can't say that you violated your probation by not checking in or by not communicating with them. Sometimes people will call the probation officer, and because they're often really busy, they can't get a hold of the probation officer. But if the probation officer doesn't receive a voicemail, they're just going to assume that you never called or you never checked in. And so a voicemail is great, but writing I think is even better because it shows whether your probation officer is responding back. Some people say, hey, I contacted my probation officer, they never called me back, they never responded back. But showing a judge an email where you outlined whatever issue was occurring and you sent that issue to your probation officer in writing and they did or they didn't reply, it just shows that you're still keeping in touch with your probation officer. So for instance, the issue where you have a child that you had to pick up in school and now you can't meet with your probation officer. If you send an email to your probation officer that says, hey, I know we were supposed to meet at so-and-so time, however, I have to now pick up my child in school. It's an emergency because they're saying that this child cannot stay in school because they are sick. So I have to go right now to pick up my child. Is there any way that we can reschedule this meeting? I'm available on so-and-so dates, or are there any dates that you can suggest, right? And so you would call your probation officer, you would follow up in an email, letting them know, thank you for speaking with me about this, just following up to put everything in writing, and then put everything in writing thereafter in that email. So it shows you made an initial phone call, you followed up through email, and there's no excuse that a probation officer can give for you not complying, or at least for you not checking in and maintaining contact with them. Again, that's a really important pro tip that a lot of people underestimate. But if you show that proof in court, I don't see a judge violating your probation, especially if there is an emergency that occurred. So I hope that information is helpful to you. If you have any other questions, you can comment them down below, and I'm always happy to answer your questions. And you can also message me on my website, mydclaw.com, and I'm happy to chat with you there. As always, stay safe, take care. I'll see you soon.